Click here to subscribe to our channel. Do not forget to press the bell icon to get regular updates of our free videos.
Okay, my students, once again I have just appeared to discuss the topic and carry it further. In the previous class, we have made a study of modern history. What should be our method to prepare the modern history? But in the previous lecture, we have covered the two parts. I have told you earlier that for the sake of convenience, the modern history has been divided in four different segments or four different parts. The first one is the history of 18th century, which we have already discussed with you. The second one part is the history of colonialism. This part has also been covered by us. And the third one part is the history of nationalism, which we have to start today. And the fourth one part is the post-independence era, which should be done today. Now observe Indian nationalism. My students, you may be a bit, you can say, confused about the term nationalism. What is nationalism? Because I think not simply in the syllabus of history, rather in the syllabus of whole of humanities paper, nationalism is possibly the most debatable and discussed topic. What is nationalism? Here I have to give you the information. The earliest form of nationalism was prepared by, or the earliest form of nationalism was just shaped up by the European monarchs in 16th and 17th century. In fact, it was the time you will find that some ambitious dynasties of Europe started to carve out the region. They established the centralized government, maintained the army and bureaucracy, and they even projected themselves as the symbol of nation. So it was the earliest manifestation of nationalism in Europe. But this nationalism was associated with the king and monarchs. So it was not the true nationalism. This was rather felt up to 19th century. This nationalism was having a parochial base, an elitist base. What you know as the popular form of nationalism or the modern nationalism, which appeared after American Revolution and French Revolution. Because it was in course of this revolution, there was the declaration of the rights of men and citizens. So here you can say, in course of the French Revolution, you know, for the first time, there was the integration between the state and society. Earlier, the state was a quite different domain, and the state was nothing to do with the common people directly. A state was imposing the rule from above. But it was after the French Revolution, you can say, there was the popular participation in statecraft, and popular participation changed the perception of the whole politics. One important thing is, whenever we will go through the world history, we will come to realize this, just after the French Revolution and all European war started, on the one hand, there were European monarchs which were fighting against the French people, and as the French people in course of the revolution, they almost destroyed the institution of monarchy. So after that, there was a popular government in France that was known as Republic. So French Republic was fighting against the monarchs of Europe. So for the first time, it was a war between the monarchs of Europe and the people of France. So there was the slogan of the power of the people, and it is from here you can say the modern nationalism emerged. Up now come to this Indian part of nationalism. Up here the question is, whenever nationalism came to be evaluated in Asia, African and Latin American countries. So normally in the evaluation of nationalism, it was the European parameters which are given primacy. So on European parameters, they are actually evaluated whether nationalism existed in India prior to the advent of British or not. It existed in Asia African nations. It was almost true of all the nations. There was a group of thinkers in India which came to believe that nationalism had existed in India from the time immemorial, because you know during ancient period itself there was the rising concept of the Jambu Dwipa. What is Jambu Dwipa? So you know the concept of a demarcated boundary of Indian subcontinent means Indian subcontinent was itself symbolizing a Jambu Dwipa, and the ruler who used to have the control on the whole Jambu Dwipa, so he was projected as the Chakravarti ruler. So the concept of Jambu Dwipa and Chakravarti ruler has given some idea of, and the primary idea of, the boundary in India. So it is from here the idea of nationalism grew. But here you can say, but some other scholars who are just observing the nationalism on European parameters, they came to believe कि no, for development of nationalism, there are certain or minimum criteria should be followed. What is the minimum criteria in this regard? The minimum criteria is that there should be the people's participation and integration between the state and the people. So that would be the true nationalism. So if you are going to search this sort of true nationalism, so on that parameter we can say that such nationalism did not emerge in India prior to the advent of the British. So that is the one matter of controversy we have to discuss with you. The second one issue associated with is that the second an issue. One debatable issue is that whether India emerged to be a nation prior to the advent of British or not. And the second one issue is what you know as Indian nationalism. So here as the trigger, the British worked behind the rise of nationalism in India. Or nationalism was basically, you can say, whether it was the Western product or the Western, you can say, initiative, or nationalism in India emerged due to the Indian initiative itself, or what was having the greater role, whether the Western elements or Indian elements. So here you can very well make a judgment. I've just observed Indian nationalism. Here you will come to realize that for the first topic is proto-nationalist movement. Whenever we are just confront with the topic like the rise of nationalism in India, so the study of nationalism starts from the proto-nationalism. Here, before going further, it is essential to make certain things clear. One important thing is whenever you start preparation of the study of Indian nationalism, so normally students are supposed to start from the foundation of Indian National Congress in 1885, and the topic is finished up to the independence of India, means 1947. But I think the term nationalism should be taken in the larger context in India. Larger context in that sense, in fact, against the British rule, when the Indian resistance started, it is from here we should try to record the rise of nationalism in India. For example, you can say that the initial resistance against the British rule was initiated by the tribals and peasants, who were the so-called uncivilized people. So it is still a matter of surprise when our educated Indians were making cooperation with the British rule in India. It was during this period that tribals and peasants, the so-called uncivilized and uneducated people, who took initiative in resisting against the British rule. So that this was known as proto-nationalist movement. Why proto-nationalist? Because they did not develop the modern ideology which can qualify the Western parameters. So that's why better we have to characterize the term proto-nationalist for this sort of movement. Then you observe, then the Great Revolt of 1857 took place. So you have to move from the proto-nationalist movement to Great Revolt of 1857. Here it is a matter of controversy whether you should characterize the Great Revolt of 1857 as the National War of Independence, or simply you can say a popular upsurge, or actually Sipahi Mutiny is you can say a thing which has been left you can say behind, and much earlier the term has been left now, because this term Sipahi Mutiny is not convincing for any Indian scholar and even the foreign scholar. This view was given by John K. Mallison etc. in the very early, and this thesis continued up to possibly 1950, but after that it was almost rejected, and earlier it was believed it was something more than the Sipahi Mutiny and something less than the National War of Independence. But I am recalling when 150 centenary and 150 you can say birth year of this Great Revolt of 1857 was being celebrated. So at that time, some scholars from Irfan Habib to Shirin Musubi and many other scholars, they just came to redefine the nature of Indian Great Revolt of 1857, and they emphasized we should not hesitate to accept it as the first war of independence. So now we can take it as the first war of independence, the Great Revolt of 1857, and not to speak of the Indian scholars, but even foreign scholars are ready to characterize it as the first war of Indian independence. So there is no risk, and you are having a lot of evidences to prove this. That is not possible for me to discuss about the evidences. Then we can move to modern nationalist movement. Gradually, now we are moving the modern nationalist movement. So the first manifestation of modern nationalist movement is what? That is socio-religious reform movement. Socio-religious reform movement means, the socio-religious reform movement which took place in India in 19th century. That was socio-religious reform movement. Means it was nothing to do with the nation directly or nationalism directly, but it is supposed to be precursor of modern nationalism in India. Why? On the Western parameters, I have told you earlier that there should be the better coordination and better assimilation or integration between society and the state, or you can say the people and the government. So, or you can say slightly the popular participation. First thing. Second one thing, there should be the growing consciousness of belonging to each other among the people residing in the different parts of India. So there you can say it is after the socio-religious reform movement of 19th century, you will come to realize they developed a sense of getting associated. Means now the people from Karnataka, even from Madras, even from Mysore, they were having the same enthusiasm for the reforms in society, the reforms in Indian culture, Indian religion, as you find in case of the reformers in North India and the reformers in Bengal. So India developed a sense of belonging to each other, and the people from different parts developed a sense of fellow feeling in course of the religious reform movement. So we can take it as a social cultural surgery to India, and it is after this surgery India emerged to be a modern nation. But my students, whenever you will just discuss in details, in course of socio-religious reform movement, you will find two different sorts of manifestation. On the one hand, there is the growing influence of the westernized elements, means it was verging more and more towards the western elements. The second one trend is it was moving to the revivalist course, means given the revivalist movement, revivalist elements are there. So here you can see in course of the socio-religious reform movement there was a dichotomy. On the one hand, excessive westernized elements, on the other hand excessive traditional elements, and later in Indian politics you can divide both the trends in two different phases of Indian National Congress. Now you can safely move toward the politics of Indian National Congress, and the first phase is the moderate phase. So in the moderate phase you will realize the influence of excessive westernized elements, but in course of the moderate phase of Indian nationalism you find some English educated people were having the dominance over the Congress, and their policy and programs were having the certain positive side and certain negative side, certain limitations as well. So you have to go through all the aspects of the moderate politics, the strength, the weakness, the features, etc., etc. Then you are moving to the extremist phase. It was in extremist phase you will realize that there is some revivalist reaction, means in the you can see in the ideas of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, Aurobindo Ghosh, you will find excessive emphasis over the traditional elements or on Indian culture. So here you will find the growing influence of revivalist elements. So both the elements are manifest, the Western as well as the revivalist elements could better be manifested in the moderate phase as well as the extremist phase of Indian National Congress. This phase is over. Gradually, if you are moving further, so you are coming to Gandhian phase. Just stop here for 1 minute. Here I have to underline one thing. Moderate phase is having certain features, certain strength and certain weakness. When there was the rise of extremist phase, the extremists were making a claim that moderate phase was confined to the elitist class of Indian society, and moderate politics did not express the faith into the masses of India. So this view was rejected by extremist phase, and extremist phase is talking about the strength of the common people of India. But even extremists could not link their movement to the common people of Bengal and the common people of India. They could not bring the masses, especially the peasants which formed at that time at least 80 to 85% of the total population. So they could not bring them in under their confidence and drag them into the mainstream of national movement. So whether it might be the moderate phase or extremist phase, but national movement remained to be, or you can say, develop an elitist base. It remained to verge on elitist base. It could not get linked to the common people. So this was the common weakness at that time. Then there was the advent of Gandhi. In this diagram you can very well observe that there was the advent of Gandhi, and at the time of advent of Gandhi, Gandhi could link the masses to the movement. So there emerged the mass phase of Indian politics, and Gandhi brought to a greater extent, not you can say finally, but to a greater extent, you can say integration between the Indian National Congress and the common people of India. So the politics of mass phase started from 1920 onwards. So then you can go through the whole Gandhian phase in totality. But realize one thing, when the movement started what you know as modern nationalism, so that manifested for the first time in the end of 19th century in course of the social reform movement. But it remained to be elitist up to moderate phase and extremist phase. It was in 1920s, it entered into the mass phase under Gandhi. Then in 1930s, then in 1940s, you will realize one important thing. One specific feature of Gandhian movement was that, in spite of the emphasis on the mass phase, or even after getting success in making a link between the Congress and the masses, Gandhian leadership was having one weakness. After all, it was having a tinge of high-born Hindu, means it was having some Savarna Sanskara, Savarna leanings. So where the lower caste people or lower caste leaders were gradually being isolated from the Congress. So that's why you can see in the next one, the diagram part, I have made this point clear, the development of lower class movement and the role of the leaders like Bhim Rao Ambedkar, Periyar Nayakar, Sri Narayan Guru, etc. means ki when the lower caste leaders were getting dissociated and isolated, so gradually they organized the lower caste movement. Here you can find the name Bhim Rao Ambedkar is the well known person you know, but apart from Bhim Rao Ambedkar you will come to know about EVS Periyar Nayakar. You can also count the name of Narayan Guru. So they were the lower caste leaders, and they brought the lower caste people into the mainstream of the national movement. So national movement became a bit more inclusive now. Then you are gradually observing one important thing, the role of socialist and communist movement. Because after the Gandhian movement should be given the credit for dragging the masses into the mainstream of national politics. But simultaneously the credit should be given to socialist and communist leaders as well. Because Gandhian movement was having one more limitation I have to discuss with you. It was definitely having the extra leanings towards the peasants, and Gandhi was having a very strong soft corner, a very strong soft corner for the peasants. He was talking about the rights of peasants. He was projecting India as the land of peasants, but he slightly neglected. If you are taking the case of Ahmedabad, industrial workers as the exception, so he slightly neglected the case of the working class. So it was the socialist and communist who brought a large number of working class people into the mainstream of national movement. So up to this point you will come to realize the Indian national movement became a bit more inclusive due to larger participation of peasants and workers. So here you can say now when the national movement started from socialist reform movement, means modern type of nationalism, in the end of 19th century, so it was having simply elitist base, but now it has become much more inclusive. And the last one question I have raised here, does Indian nationalism present a model of inclusive nationalism? Means now you are posed a question, can you take the Indian nationalism as an example of an inclusive nationalism even after independence? So the question would be the big no, naturally, because you know, in fact still a large part of Indian population was working outside of the mainstream of national movement, and Indian nation had to make a big walk and overcome so many hurdles to ensure the social justice in India. Because we got the first independence on 15th August 1947. But the second independence had to be achieved only after enforcing the Constitution of India and the empowerment of the weaker section of Indian society. So that's why the 26th January 1950 is also a day of liberation, as you find the case of 15th August 1947. And India is unique in that case. India is celebrating two independence days. The first independence day, that is the political independence, and then you can say second independence day as the economic and social independence. So you will just start going through the national movement. So my request is to take the whole national movement as an organic whole, because actually I am not having a time to delve deep into the individual topic. That's why I have not given here the details. Simply I am giving some idea the whole of the topics, not simply of history, but even in other subjects you will find the case. In humanities, integration is the beauty of the subject. So always try to explain the things by linking with each other. Now we are just moving towards the post-independence era. That is the quite significant era for your history reading. Post-independence era is the very significant part of the national movement. Post-independence era, you can very well observe here. Just observe the thing. What is the objective here? When India got freedom, India got simply political freedom. But with Indian independence, more questions we have solved, but more questions are still lingering to be solved again. And we are having the specific burden of nation building. Because on 15th August 1947, India got freedom. But India could not emerge to be a truly nation. Here I have to discuss one thing with you. The first one thing is partition. Partition is supposed to be one of the 10 major tragedies in the world. Because in Indian partition, it was how much costing to Indian economy, society and culture you cannot imagine. Because right from up here the point was since last 1100 years Hindus and Muslims were living together and they developed a complete culture. But it was in course of the national movement, partially due to the opportunistic politics of certain leaders and partially due to the divide and rule policy of the British. You can say certain leaders started to propound a theory that Hindus and Muslims are the two nations. So it cost India too much, and finally India had to manifest partition. For India, independence is too much important, but for Pakistan, independence means partition, because Pakistan could attain the independence only after the partition. So both treated independence in different manner. But India, just after the partition, India had to face the big problem of Hindu-Muslim rights and refugees. You can say nearly 10 lakhs people were killed in course of the Hindu-Muslim rights. It was, definitely one of the 10 major tragedies in the world. Apart from that, it is estimated that nearly in Punjab, 1 crore 40 lakh people had to make the transfer from this region to that region. Means the migration from India to Pakistan and vice versa, that continued even after the partition for months. So you can very well imagine that this was not simply that. When the people came from Punjab means ki Pakistani Punjab, and some Hindus were just expelled from there, Muslims just moved towards Pakistan. So refugees came to Delhi and they gathered at Delhi and they created a big you can say problem for law and order in Delhi, because they nourished such a, you can say, wider hatred against each other. Finally you can say with the advent of refugees, even Delhi became you can say quite disturbed, and Hindu-Muslim rights became a very common feature in Delhi itself. So our government had to cope up with this situation of Hindu-Muslim rights. My student, whenever you are making a study of this part of post-independence era, I have to request one thing to you. In fact, take the whole post-independence era as an organic whole. This is the most significant part of not simply history but also humanities, because apart from getting the knowledge of history, it is here you find the certain direction for the study of the Indian economy, for political constitution of India, even the part of India and the world. So this part is quite important for you. Here you can very well develop the interdisciplinary approach while making a study of the different subjects. So here I am requesting you to give the particular attention to this part of history. Second thing was that most of the students were born in the era of globalization and economic liberalization. So unfortunately they are not having the knowledge about the history between 1947, because normally the students are particular up to the history of 1947, means the era of Indian independence. But after that, between 1947 to 2011, 2012 and 2013, this part of history is normally neglected by students, and it creates some sort of, you can say, a blackout part in the mind between 47 to 2013 or 2014. Then either they start from Modi era or maximum to UPA 2 era. So I think this means this blank should be filled up through making a study of this part, and from 1947 to 2014 and 2013 you can move easily after making a study of this part of the history. Partition of India should be studied even from the viewpoint of what was the impact of partition on Indian economy, Indian constitution, what was the mood of constitution makers who were sitting in the Constituent Assembly. Hindu-Muslim rights were taking place outside and constitution makers were working in the Constituent Assembly. What was the impact of such rights and migration of population on the constitution making in India? That is equally important for you. The second one is with the integration of princely estates and nation building, because the first challenge the Indian nation had to face, the integration of Indian estates, and here you can say Vallabhbhai Patel and BP Menon played the very significant role, you know, because the bigger challenge was what part was lost by India as the result of the partition. A major part had to be gained by India after the integration of the princely estates. Here you have to be a bit critical, because normally in the old historiography the whole credit for the integration was being given to Vallabhbhai Patel. Here you have to be a bit cautious, and cautious for why? Because in the recent historiography it has been highlighted that as much credit is being given to Vallabhbhai Patel, so much credit should be given to even the popular upsurge and popular movement, because it was the popular movement in princely states which created the situation for the integration of the states with Indian Union. And even Vallabhbhai Patel was bargaining with the Indian princes and compelling them to submit before the Indian Union. So it was on the basis that if you are not doing so, then your people will rise against you. So in this way you can say the popular movement should be given the proper place while making a study of the integration of princely states. Then you are moving to the other topic like transformation of colonial state into democratic state through the framing of constitution. Even from this part in general studies and in optional you can find a lot of questions. In general studies in 2015, so far as I am recalling, if there could not have been the the Government of India Act before the constitution makers as a document, so it could not have been possible for them to frame the Constitution of India within 3 years. So this was definitely, you can say, a very good question, a standard question, and it needs normally the conceptual knowledge on the part of the students. They have to draw the picture how and why. They can give the yes note, that is better, and they can give a lot of evidences in the favor. About the Indian Constitution, this part is important for you because you can, in Constituent Assembly, there was the discussion on the major issues. So here you have to be particular about one thing. Here, in this part of constitution making, you can very well understand what was the, you can say, mental climate in Constituent Assembly in course of the framing constitution. What were the views of different leaders in this regard? Secondly, constitution making was not simply going in India, but even in other colonies like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and in many other countries. But what were lacunas in their constitution making process, and what was the strength in Indian side? Indian side was that there was the open environment and the open discussion. Even the minority view was not quelled up. The minority view was not suppressed by the constitution makers. That's why you can say Indian constitution became so much successful. Apart from that, I think if you are making a study of political constitution, but in this part of syllabus you can go with the constitution for 4 decades. When constitution came into existence, the first challenge before constitution was the abolition of Jamindari, and it led to the first constitutional amendment in India. In Nehruvian era, what was the problem from the perspective of the constitution making? Then you are moving towards as the era of Lal Bahadur Shastri was short-lived, so you can move to the era of Gandhi. It was during this era you will find the collision among the different organs of the government, and particularly between the executive and judiciary. So you can just move here. Then how the Article 74 was being explained, what were the relations between the president and the council of ministers. So all the things should be clear in this part, and this can very well work behind, you can say, making the base knowledge for the Indian constitution and polity. I think this is the very significant part. Then you are just moving to the other one issue, to the conceit polyphonic character of Indian nation, official language policy, formation of linguistic states to defer the issue of uniform civil code. Now you can very well understand that it was the major challenge or the major test which the Indian or the first government of India had to undergo, because India's nation is projected as unity in diversity, vividhta mein ekta. Now the question arises, given there was the matter of official language of India, and in course of the national movement it was already decided that Hindi would be the official language, and when Constituent Assembly this matter was raised, so the reactions were enlisted from the non-Hindi belt, particularly from Tamil Nadu, but even from other states also, including Bengal. And those leaders who were earlier a great advocate for the Hindi language as the official language, they turned to be hostile against it. So then Nehruvian government had to make a compromise in this regard, and first compromise was made in 1950, and then finally in 1963 it was decided that Hindi would be the language and English would remain to be an associate official language for an indefinite period. So here you can say whether this stand by the Indian government was right and wrong. So this is a matter of dispute, but now it has almost been clear that it was the wise stand on the part of the Indian government. The same happened in case of the formation of linguistic states. Earlier the Indian National Congress favored the formation of linguistic states in course of the national movement itself, and it was already decided, but due to the partition, phenomena of partition and changing mental climate of the time, now the Indian leaders just withdrew from the earlier stand, and they came to realize, particularly the Congress leaders, if this linguistic states or the model of linguistic states would be introduced in India, so that would be detrimental to national unity, and this will definitely encourage the concept of the son of the soil. So for that fear, this proposal was withdrawn, but the movement already started in Telangana, in Andhra, and due to the movement in 1953, finally the government of Nehru had to succumb to the pressure, and Andhra Pradesh became the first one linguistic state, and then Tamil Nadu, and after that you can say in 1956 finally 14 states. Here the point is that could be interesting for you, because in GS part 2 to 3 times there is a question, and even in 2017 the one question is verging on this topic itself, the basic identity of Indian culture is regional, not provincial. This is associated with the issue, although this issue is linked to the case of Mamata Banerjee in Bengal, and the issue of Nepali language. In Gorkhaland, she tried to impose the Bengali language, but you can say resistance started from the side of, you can say, the Gorkhas, and they opposed this measure. So basically this question was having the trigger from Bengal, but here the base of discussion should be from linguistic state itself. It is supposed to be a wise step on the part of the government, and here is the example. Ramchand Guha, in the recently, although he has published the book much earlier in 2007 itself, but in 2017 at the 70th year of Indian independence, he has revised his book and added some chapter. So he highlighted one point. He has just highlighted the point that in fact Indian policy of Indian government was wise on this ground. Just after independence, Muhammad Ali Jinnah went to East Pakistan, means present Bangladesh, and told the people of Bengal, if you are going to accept Urdu as your mother tongue, that is better, and you are going to decide it sooner, it is better for you. What is the outcome? Outcome is a separatist movement in East Bengal and finally the formation of Bangladesh. Likewise, Ramchand Guha has highlighted the point in 1956 when India was just making the formation of linguistic states. At that time, the government of Sri Lanka imposed Sinhala language on Tamil people forcefully. What is the outcome? A civil war in Sri Lanka. And this, you can say, bloodbath has not completely ended till today. So you can very well understand that on this ground, our policy has become successful. Even on uniform civil code, we have taken the timely and wise decision because it was a quite divisive issue in Indian society. Then you are just moving towards to ensure social justice to those who had grown under the pressure of feudal and colonial exploitation since centuries. So there you can talk about the social justice and what measures were adopted for the betterment in condition of SC/ST, women, what was the approach of the constitution makers towards the backward caste, then you can say caste, and then what approach towards Muslims. Unfortunate condition was that after the partition, the mental climate of Constituent Assembly became so much bitter against, you can say, partition, due to partition between the Hindu and Muslim communities. Excessive tensions were prevailing at that time. So even constitution makers hesitated and they could not give the proper safety and you can say proper safeguards to Muslims. For example, you can say even among Muslims, there was a large number of poor people, some downtrodden, but no provision for SC/ST in Muslims. Later you can say some constitution makers were even thinking on the plank of proportional representation for them because separate electorate was already abolished by the Constituent Assembly and willingly by the Minority Commission. But they could not take any measures on this ground. So here you can very well understand while going through this topic, you can try to link the phenomena of our constitution makers and approach of our constitution makers, and you can compare this approach with the present era, whether they have taken the right decision or wrong decision and what steps should be taken now. Then you can very well observe to restructure Indian economy, agrarian reforms, abolition of Jamindari, Bhudan movement, Green Revolution, development of irrigation, multi-purpose project, Nehruvian economic model and economic planning. The very significant part you can see. Because it is here you can very well understand Nehruvian model of economy. Without the proper knowledge of Nehruvian model of economy, no one can understand properly what is the neoliberal economy. Because Nehruvian economy was the example of a closed economy. And under Mrs. Gandhi, it became more closed. And then gradually from the time of Mrs. Gandhi onwards, from 1980 onwards, although the process of revival started under Mrs. Gandhi herself, and after this Rajiv Gandhi carried the process of liberalization further. But you can say credit for this liberalization has given to Narasimha Rao. It was a matter of chance because there was the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, and even he could have been alive at that time, so whether the Congress could have form the government or not, it is still a matter of discussion. This part is quite important for you, very important for you, because you know from this part you will find a lot of questions in the optional paper and simultaneously in general studies paper as well. You will find a question from here. For example, in 2013 you will find a question on Green Revolution, Jai Jawan Jai Kisan. Likewise, one question on Bhudan movement of Vinoba Bhave. So you can even in GS you can find a question And Nehruvian model of economy is, evaluation of the Nehruvian model of economy is quite important, and it has particularly drawn the attention of scholars even today, because in the era of economic liberalization and formation of the NDA government, there is continuous attack on the Nehruvian model of economy, and even Prime Minister as well as the Finance Minister have given the open statement that the Nehruvian era of economy or Nehruvian model of economy became detrimental to the Indian economy as a whole. So here you can make an evaluation ki what was the stand of Nehru, what was the strength part of the Nehruvian model of economy, the weakness part, and it is on this basis you can understand the gradual evolution of Indian economy till today. So even this topic could have can be much beneficial for you. The last one you observe, foreign policy of India, formation of phase under the British rule, formation phase under the British rule, impact of anti-imperialist policy, non-alignment, relations with neighbors, relations with Asia-African countries and with two superpowers. Here my view is you have to start from Nehruvian era, then you have to cover Lal Bahadur Shastri era. Lal Bahadur Shastri, because you can say formation of the foreign policy of India has taken place under Nehru, because the basic structure was prepared there. Even today, Nehruvian policy is being criticized, but the government is not taking, even the present government is not taking the proper stand against this policy, because anyhow, directly or indirectly, we have not been free from the sanskara of non-alignment. You can very well understand that this government has broke a major ice with Israel when there was the first visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Israel. But simultaneously, you will find one important thing, but the same government has to vote in favor of Palestine in UNO. So it means the Nehruvian model of economy was having the value and significance even today. So you have to here give what was the stand of India on the foreign policy, what was the method of the two superpowers, method of dealing with two superpowers, how did India deal with the two nearest neighbors like Pakistan and China. So all parts are important for you. Then what relationship existed between India and newly independent Asia-African nations. So for the foundation knowledge of Indian foreign policy, this part is much significant for you, and this part is, you can say, dual purpose and doubly beneficial for you. And it is due to the fact, on the one hand, you can solve a large number of questions in general studies on the basis of the study of this part directly, but indirectly it will help you in developing your approach towards the study of economy, Indian economy, Indian polity and constitution, as well as the foreign policy of India. Okay, thank you my students.